So we're going to dive into Module 3, okay, which is entry process. Chapter 141, 142, and 143 are all very closely related, and they account for nearly 10% of the questions on the exams. So it's almost 8 to 10 questions on the exam. Okay, and that's over the last 10 years. You really need to understand the entry process and the requirements in great details, as they serve as the fundamentals for the industry. Practical application questions often come from here. Most people do very well in these chapters, so ensure you understand it. 141.0 covers the scope. Make a note of the scope of Part 141. This short paragraph explains entry types covered here and what it does not cover. In video 1 to our Module 3, we go into details on how to highlight this section. I would recommend bookmarking this section so you can easily refer back to it if your question is asking for exports, FTZ, or trade fairs. We also dive into the difference between entry and entry summary. So an entry means the documents that are required to obtain release of the goods have been filed with Customs. An entry summary is referring to the filing of Customs Form or CBP Form 7501. And then any additional documentation to calculate duty to allow Customs to collect statistics. Again, entry is the submission of everything, of all the documents to obtain the release of goods. The entry summary is the Customs Form 7501 and any additional documentation to calculate duty. All right, so that's two differences. People get confused by that sometimes. In general, the entry process happens in 2 stages. The cargo release is secured by filing Customs Form 3461, and then the entry summary, which is completed by using Customs Form 7501. Both can be filed at the same time by securing their release through the entry summary. This is common practice today. I know Nate and I do that in our business. The entry summary contains all information required on the cargo release, plus any additional information needed for the entry summary. The terms entry and entry summary are not interchangeable, so know the difference. Understand the difference. Pay attention to power of attorney, POA info, and subpart C, power of attorney. The last few years, we've seen a copy of the POA being provided on the exam, and a few questions are asked. Customs provides commercial invoice information in 141.86 and also in 142.6. So we recommend you cross-reference each section in your books, so you can always check both sections when there's a question on commercial invoice requirements. I suggest that in 141.86, you write down to check 142.6, and the same thing in 142.6, write down to check 141.86. And that does come up a lot. We do see a lot of questions regarding commercial invoice requirements. And again, it's also something good to know. I'm still using this chapter to tell importers what's required in the commercial invoice when we ask them for information. So it's one of those long-standing chapters that was worn out in my old book, and now it's bookmarked on a web browser. (19 CFR 141). This talks about what requires entry and what information is required. It's important to remember that as an importer is ultimately responsible for duty payment, they can pay it themselves, or the broker can pay it on their behalf, and the importer pays the broker. So it's either the importer is paying directly to Customs, or the broker is paying directly to Customs and then billing the importer. 141.4b, exceptions to entry requirements. Pay attention to these and have these bookmarked. These will go over anything that's doesn't require an entry, any sort of exception that is made in that whole process. Subpart F is going to go into details of invoices, when an invoice is required, what types of invoices, and what is required on the invoice. 141.89, flag this section as well. It's going to provide additional information required for certain types of merchandise. When taking the test, the best way to identify questions that cover 141.89 is to look for keys in the question, such as what additional information is required on an invoice for merchandise classified under, or which of the following is not an additional invoice requirement. And then the choices are specific articles or an HTS heading. When classified as X, what additional information is required in invoice? So those are the key kind of things you want to look for. When you see that, it's probably going to be something under 141.89 that'll help you reach there. Subpart G is going to be deposit of estimated duties. It's important to note that duty payments is only estimated as entry, is not considered closed until it liquidates, which is usually a year after. Excuse me, I can't speak today. Duty payment is only estimated as the entry is not considered closed until it liquidates, which is usually within a year of entry release. So what that means is we transmit an entry today, it gets released. Customs has, it's like 360 days, I believe it is, to come back and review that entry. You're going to make a payment within 10 days to Customs of the estimated duties. Customs has that time period now to go over the documents, request more information, look it over, and either accept the duty as it was submitted, or say, hey, you actually owe us more, or hey, you owe us less, here's a check, which you don't see that often. So they have a year to do that. And then once they do either accept it or send in a refund or send a bill, then it liquidates. And then no changes can be made to the entry. 19 CFR 142 goes into more detail of the actual process. As mentioned previously, Part 142 deals with the actual entry process. It details the time for filing, documents required, bond requirements, invoice requirements, delinquent payments, and more. It is closely related to Part 141. 142 also covers entry numbers and construction of them. There's actually a formula that's used to build entry numbers. And then what happens is brokers will get a block of numbers to use that they'll upload in their system. The system will automatically assign them. But there is actually a formula to actually calculate and figure out the actual entry number.